My story tonight comes from ancient Vedic literature from India. Can everyone hear me there at the back? Okay. So long ago in ancient India, there lived a man named Tintakarla, and he was married to a woman named Kalavati, who everyone agreed was the most beautiful woman on earth. But as her husband knew, she was no ordinary woman. Oh no. She was an Apsara, a celestial maiden with magical powers. And it was her job every day to fly up to heaven and sing for Lord Indra, the king of the gods, in Devaloka, which we call heaven. So every day she'd fly up to heaven and sing in Indra's court, and then at night she'd come back down to be with her husband on earth. And in this way they lived very happily for a long time. Then one morning, Kalavati said, "I'll be home a little later than usual today, Tinta, my dear, for Ramba is performing a new dance for Indra, and he has invited all the citizens of heaven to come and watch the queen of the Apsaras dance. And it will be a grand celebration." All of a sudden, Tintakarla was overcome with curiosity. "Oh, please," he said, "please take me with you." "No, no," said Kalavati. "Humans are not allowed to enter heaven." "Oh, please, please, I promise I won't tell a soul. I would just love to see the kingdom of heaven, and especially that luxurious court of Indra that you've told me about." "No, no, please, please, please." And so he coaxed, and finally she relented. And using her magical powers, she shrunk her husband down to the size of a tiny little fly. And she tucked him carefully inside a lotus blossom and put it behind her ear and draped herself with extra jewels and flew up to heaven. And from his hiding place, Tintakarla could see the most magnificent sights that no human being had ever seen. He watched as beautiful goddesses and gods, draped in gorgeous bright silks embroidered with gold and silver, wearing beautiful long necklaces, sparkling crowns, sitting on crystal thrones that floated on gold and pink clouds. And he listened to the most beautiful music that the Gandharvans played on instruments that he had never seen. And he heard the Apsaras singing, and their voices were just as delicate as crystal chimes in the wind. And Lord Indra even had a court jester who could change his shape at will, and he turned himself into a goat and did the funniest dance that Tintakarla had ever seen. And it was a grand celebration. And when it was over, Kalavati flew back home, turned her husband back to his normal size, and sighed a huge sigh of relief that nothing had happened, because she knew that Lord Indra had a very short temper when it came to being disobeyed. And the next morning, as usual, she flew up to heaven to sing in Lord Indra's court, and Tintakarla stayed home on earth. But his mind was just fairly spinning with all the wonderful things that he had seen the night before. And he couldn't get out of his mind those beautiful dancing maidens rhythmically swaying to the music with all their silver bangles and anklets tinkling in time to the music. And his head was just full of this. And he just decided to go for a walk to kind of calm down. And he went to the marketplace at the end of the lane. And there he saw a goat in one of the stalls that looked exactly like the one that he had seen dancing for Indra the night before. And he rushed up to the goat and said, "Dance for me." Well, a passerby said, "Goats don't dance, you dummy." And he laughed as he walked away. And Tintakarla said, no, I insist. This goat danced for Lord Indra last night in heaven. I saw him do it. Well, the goatherd said, go home. Obviously, the hot sun has addled your brain. But the word soon spread through the marketplace, and from there to the nearby city of Nagapura, that there was this madman who thought that goats could dance. And perhaps you didn't know this, but I should warn you that the king of the gods has spies, millions of them, and their eyes are watching everywhere. They never close their eyes. And hearing this rumor floating around in Nagapura, they instantly flew up to heaven and reported everything to Lord Indra. And using his divine inner sight, the king of the gods soon discovered everything that had happened, and he was furious. He summoned Kalavati to him at once, and he raged and thundered at her. How dare you bring a human into heaven and into my own palace, which is reserved for royalty? And Kalavati trembled with fear, and he raged on, and he said, because you have gone against my wishes, before sunrise you will turn into a marble statue and stand forever in a pillar at the Nagapura temple. Forever. And every time your husband happens to walk by to go into the temple, you will be able to see him, but never again be able to embrace your husband. Kalavati was absolutely crushed and devastated by the cruelty of this curse, and she threw herself down in front of the king of the gods, begging, please reduce the severity of this curse. Don't make it last forever. Well, Lord Indra, he restlessly drummed his fingers on the arm of his throne. He sighed. At last he was moved just a tiny bit by the beautiful Kalavati weeping at his feet. And he said, oh, very well. If that temple ever happens to be demolished and the pillars are knocked down, then you will be freed. Now go. Kalavati fled from heaven down to earth into her husband's waiting arms and sobbed out her sad story. Tintakarla felt so guilty, and he apologized over and over again for ever inviting himself to heaven. But there was nothing he could do, and full of guilt, they finally fell asleep. And when he woke up in the morning, Kalavati was gone. He ran all the way to Nagapura, to the temple, and there was his beloved wife, frozen in marble in the pillar at the entrance. He wept and wept to see her there, and he said, I promise somehow I'll find a way to free you. And he sat at the foot of that pillar all day long, just racking his brains. How can I free my wife? I know that King Narasimha will never knock that temple down. It was only just completed last year, and he wouldn't ever knock it down without a very good reason. And nobody will ever believe me that my wife is trapped inside that pillar. And so he sat, and he really felt after the day had passed that all hope was gone, and he was about to get up and trudge home when a little sparrow happened to fly into the courtyard and landed on a flower basket hanging above his head, showering down petals on him. And he thought, well, maybe that was an auspicious omen, and I'll sit here a little longer. And about 2 minutes later, a stray dog came in the temple gate and went over to the wall and dug up a bone. And when Tintakarla saw how happy he was, wagging his tail and trotting out the gate with his buried treasure, suddenly an idea exploded in his mind. Aha! That just might work. And so he hurried off home, just as the setting sun shed soft pink rays over Kalavati's figure. Now, once home, he went immediately to the kitchen and gathered up 4 clay pots with lids and carried them to the bedroom. And then he got Kalavati's jewelry box and emptied it out on the bed and filled up all the 4 pots with the treasure of her jewelry and all the gifts that Indra had given her. Priceless jewels and gems and necklaces and little tiaras. Put them all together and waited till the middle of the night. Then he wound himself round in yards and yards of orange cotton fabric, disguising himself as a monk. And he walked all the way to Nagapura in the dead of night. And under cover of darkness, the streets were all deserted at that time of night. He buried the 4 pots of treasure in different locations around the city. And the last 4th pot he buried right in front of Kalavati's pillar. When morning came, sun was up, he started wandering around the streets of the city, muttering mantras under his breath. And everyone who saw him thought, there must be a new holy man in town. And the word drifted over to the palace. And when King Narasimha heard that there was a new holy man in town, he sent word by a messenger and invited him to come to the palace. But Tintakarala was very clever, and he very politely refused the messenger, saying, I have long ago shunned all material wealth. I cannot go. And when that word came back to King Narasimha, he thought, this must truly be a holy man indeed. And so he took his retinue and went off to the marketplace to meet this holy man. And he found Tintakarala sitting at the side of the road under a fig tree. And as he approached him, a little bird flew out from the branches, and he sang a few notes. And Tintakarala laughed. He said, oh, thank you, my friend. And the king was surprised. He said, you understand the language of birds? Oh, yes, he said. Well, what did he say? He said, to enjoy the treasure which is buried where I have been sitting. But I have no need for treasure, so you can have it if you like. And he got up and walked down the road. Well, the king had one of his servants dig right there, and sure enough, up came one of the pots that Tintakarala had buried the night before. Well, the king was highly pleasured by this, so he followed. He saw where Tintakarala had gone. He turned into a little park. So he walked down the road and into the park, and there was Tintakarala sitting on a stone bench. And as he approached, he was about to sit down next to this monk when a jackal barked in the jungle, not far away on the other side of the park. And Tintakarala laughed and said, thank you, my friend. And the king was amazed. What? You understand the language of beasts as well as birds? What did that jackal say to you? He said to enjoy the treasure which is buried under this bench. But as you know, I have no need of treasure, so you are welcome to it if you need it for your treasury. And he got up and left. And the king had his servants dig, and sure enough, up came a clay pot filled with jewelry. And that was really an astounding thing. The king had never, ever met or even heard of a man with such powers as this, and he followed Tintakarala all over town. And an hour later, yet another pot of treasure was brought up from the ground. And he continued to follow him. And that sage walked right through the temple gates and right up to the pillar. And when Kalavati saw her husband's face in front of her, she was overcome with grief and started to cry. And her hot tears melted right through the marble and ran down the front of the statue. Well, Tintakarala had never any idea that anything like this could happen. And he too was overcome with emotion, and he started to cry. And the king, by this time, had caught up to him, and he saw that the statue was crying. He said, What is happening here? Why is the statue crying? But Tintakarala didn't know what to say. He had to think on his feet, and he said, she is crying because you are going to die soon." "What?" said the king. "Me die?" "Yes," said Tintakarala. "She says, because you had this temple built on an inauspicious piece of ground, and furthermore, it's tilted, it's not properly aligned with the 4 cardinal directions, you have angered the gods. And if this temple is not knocked down within 3 days, you will die." Well, the king was outraged. He says, "Just wait till I get my hands on that Stapati architect who advised me." And he called for his prime minister, "Get the army in here with sledgehammers." And within 2 days, that temple was lying on the ground. And when Kalavati's pillar was broken open, she emerged unhurt and ran into her husband's arms, who was standing there waiting. And they cried with joy and walked arm in arm down the road towards their cozy home in the village. Now let's not forget, Indra has spies, and their eyes are open all the time. And they flew right back up to heaven. And when the king of the gods, who likes a good trick as much as any of us, heard what that clever Tintakarala had done and outwitted the king, he laughed uproariously and showered down thousands of soft gold rose petals upon the happy couple as they strolled home. And of course, they lived happily ever after. I should finish by saying namaste.